Most people online who call themselves skeptics are taken by surprise when they are corrected and told they are really pseudoskeptics. And it's an old word, 25 years old. The word was coined inside the Peak Skeptic organization, CSICOP, by founding father skeptics, to describe a lot of dishonest skeptics, most of them in fact, who came on board wanting to hijack the organization for political purposes. It's a good story, so if you spend your time online, crusading against the paranormal, the afterlife, and head-kicking Christians, to make them more like yourself, then you are actually a pseudo-skeptic. The term is explained quite well in Wikipedia, quoted here with some commentary. Pseudoskepticism. The term pseudoskepticism was popularized and characterized by Marcello Truzzi in response to skeptics who, in his opinion, made negative claims without bearing the burden of proof of those claims. 12 That is, evidence-free diatribes, denunciations, invective, polemic. Truzzi founded the skeptical journal Explorations and was invited to be a founding member of the skeptic organization CSICOP as its co-chairman with Paul Kurtz, who also founded Prometheus Books, pornography publishers. Truzzi's journal became the official journal of Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, CSICOP. About a year after the founding of CSICOP, he left the organization after receiving a vote of no confidence from the group's executive council. Truzzi wanted to include pro-paranormal people in the organization and pro-paranormal research in the journal, but CSICOP felt that there were already enough organizations and journals dedicated to the paranormal. Clearly they had no interest in being objective. This was a lobby group, a propaganda outlet of the negative opinion, essentially vociferous denialism. Truzzi was skeptical of investigators and debunkers who determined the validity of a claim prior to investigation. He accused CSICOP of increasingly unscientific behavior, for which he coined the term pseudoskepticism. Truzzi stated, "They tend to block honest inquiry, in my opinion. Most of them are not agnostic toward claims of the paranormal, they are out to knock them. When an experiment of the paranormal meets their requirements, then they move the goalposts. Then, if the experiment is reputable, they say it's a mere anomaly." 6. The situation he describes there is mendacity, fraud, and denialism. Pseudoskeptics, ardent materialists, are known to average a higher level of lying and cheating, from psychology studies reported by the eminent physicist Dean Radin. Pseudoskepticism. The term pseudoskepticism was popularized and characterized by Marcello Truzzi in response to skeptics who, in his opinion, made negative claims without bearing the burden of proof of those claims. Ref 12. While a professor of sociology at Eastern Michigan University in 1987, Truzzi gave the following description of pseudoskeptics in the journal Skeptic Scholar, which he founded. In science, the burden of proof falls upon the claimant, and the more extraordinary a claim, the heavier is the burden of proof demanded. The true skeptic takes an agnostic position, one that says the claim is not proved rather than disproved. He asserts that the claimant has not borne the burden of proof, and that science must continue to build its cognitive map of reality, without incorporating the extraordinary claim as a new fact. Since the true skeptic does not assert a claim, he has no burden to prove anything. He just goes on using the established theories of conventional science, as usual. But if a critic asserts that there is evidence for disproof, that he has negative hypothesis, saying, for instance, that a seeming psi result was actually due to an artifact, he is making a claim, and therefore also has to bear a burden of proof, which pseudoskeptics never do. They never supply evidence online for their claims, though they always demand it from others, while posing as scientists and prosecutors on chat lines. Marcello Truzzi, on Pseudoskepticism, Skeptic Scholar, 12/13, pp. 3-4, 1987. The term pseudoskeptic has found occasional use in fields where opposition from those within the scientific mainstream or from scientific skeptics is strong. In way back, 1994, Susan Blackmore, the pseudo-skeptics poster pin-up girl, an Oxford parapsychologist who became more pseudo-skeptical, and eventually became a CSICOP fellow in 1991, described what she termed the worst kind of pseudo-skepticism. There are some members of the skeptics groups who clearly believe they know the right answer prior to inquiry. They appear not to be interested in weighing alternatives, investigating strange claims, or trying out psychic experiences, or altered states, for themselves, heaven forbid, but only in promoting their own particular belief structure and cohesion. I have to say it, most of these people are men. Indeed, I have not met a single woman of this type. 13. So, there you have it. A damning description of the skeptic movement by one of its luminaries, in the peak skeptical organization CSICOP. That it's hollow and fake, a bunch of ideological crusaders with no interest in truth or objectivity. Quite the opposite, in fact. Moving the goalposts away from it. And most likely its leaders are guilty of this mendacity and fraud. Like Dawkins and Randi, both on the board. Another luminary, Carl Sagan, also on the board of CSICOP, voiced similar criticisms of pseudoskeptics' behavior, their mindless, evidence-free diatribes. The chief deficiency I see in the skeptical movement is its polarization, us versus them, the sense that we have a monopoly on the truth, that those other people who believe in all these stupid doctrines are morons, that if you're sensible, you'll listen to us, and if not, to hell with you. This is non-constructive. It does not get our message across. It condemns us to permanent minority status. Carl Sagan of CSICOP. Is Sagan's message getting across to you, dear pseudoskeptic? Likely not, as you probably have a learning disability, often spotted in your online outputs. Skeptics groups do point to pseudoskepticism as a pathology, an illness, here in Wiki. Who are we to argue with the skeptic group? Skeptics wrote this Wiki entry. And the skeptic groups are the finest minds available, correct? Or do you believe Carl Sagan, that you are an idiot? Remember, he is a great scientist, your hero. And another similar opinion, by British author-journalist Robert McLuhan, in his book, Randi's Prize, after lengthy study, explains that skeptics on paranormal events have ignored, twisted, distorted, misinterpreted, and disregarded evidence. He gives examples of numerous famous debunkings which turn out to be false, existing only in the head of the skeptic. So here we have listed the essentially mendacious, cheating, delusional, criminal nature of pseudoskeptics. Robert McLuhan backs up Truzy, Susan Blackmore, and Sagan, the last three all major players from CSICOP, the peak skeptic organization. Supplementary to Wiki's damning description of Skeptics, we have here a delightful animation to illustrate the many foibles, robotically shared, pathologically shared, by tens of thousands of pseudo-skeptics on the net. Online pseudo-skeptics, this is your life. This animation goes a long way toward distilling the many underfunctionings of online self-styled skeptics. It's a dialogue between a scientist and one of the skeptic community, actually revealing the many falsehoods in their beliefs, or more accurately, seriously errant behavior policies. It's a summary of many encounters online with these aggrieved, vexatious people that entirely agrees with my extensive personal experience and the well-catalogued pseudo-skeptic online behaviors at debunkingskeptics.com. The animation starts with the skeptics' always noted, absurd, infantile belief that because the scientific method utilizes skepticism for testing and dispute in its peer review process, that anyone who engages in cyberbullying is automatically a scientist. And thus, one doesn't need to know anything about the subject at hand, as they seldom do. Just go cyberbullying away, randomly, toward anyone you meet, and you are permitted, in fact, it's virtually mandatory, for the pseudo-skeptic to pose as a scientist in his first couple of YouTube entries, demanding scientific references and proof, while never providing any such thing themselves, for their own exorbitant claims, like the perennial, there is no evidence of X. It is pure armchair, thought-free debunking. And being a pseudo-scientist, the pseudo-skeptic doesn't need to know anything about the subject discussed, as he simply projects an imaginary ideal cringing opponent that exists only in his own head onto the other person on the YouTube chat line. The laboriously crafted skeptic's opponent is a custom-made perfect victim, a straw man, and the pseudo-skeptic has a battery of well-practiced, belligerent, irrelevant, killer put-downs, or so he thinks, pitching to be fired at anyone who comes into the pseudo-skeptic's crosshairs. Man, woman, or child. This manifests as Pseudoskeptics always, arguing, off-point.
Hi, I'm a skeptic.
Hi, I'm a scientist.
Me too. I'm a skeptic.
Well, skepticism is only a part of science, not the whole thing.
Science is skeptical. It must be skeptical.
Are you familiar with the scientific method?
Of course. I'm a skeptic.
Do you understand that science is a process? As scientists, we observe new phenomena. We come up with hypotheses to explain them, and then we put those hypotheses to various tests to see if our explanations really fit, or whether we're just fooling ourselves. That's where skepticism should come in. Then if our hypothesis passes those tests, we call it a theory. That's the end point of our process. A theory is a best fit to the observed phenomena. It's not absolute truth. Science is open-ended, and its conclusions are always provisional and subject to change when new observations or better explanations come along.
No. As a skeptic, I begin with an existing explanation and go directly to the endpoint, the same existing explanation. It's more definitive. It's also much faster and cheaper, and it doesn't force me to think or to change my mind. Instead of your clumsy process, we skeptics use a simpler and more streamlined approach. It's called summary dismissal and ridicule. It easily disposes of bunk and BS.
Now wait a minute. Are you saying that ridicule and dismissal are part of science?
Of course. They help us to be dispassionate and objective skeptics. Name-calling helps, too.
You call yourself a skeptic, but what we really are is a debunker.
A skeptic by any other name is still a skeptic. We skeptics are against ridiculous things. We know what's ridiculous and what's not.
How do you know what's ridiculous without actually studying it?
We skeptics know it when we see it. For example, the whole idea of continental drift is ridiculous.
I think you're a little behind the times. Science verified continental drift years ago.
That's not possible. The Earth is flat. So what would make continents move?
I'm afraid you've got some catching up to do. In any case, the absence of a plausible mechanism does not forbid the existence of a phenomenon. If it did, we would have had no diseases prior to the discovery of microbes, and the sun would have given no light before we became aware of nuclear fusion.
We skeptics are very careful in our methodology. We scan the supermarket tabloids microscopically for any articles about weird stuff. When a tabloid publishes something, we know for sure it's ridiculous.
I might not know whether weird things, like powered flight and continental drift, are real or not, but as a scientist I would not dismiss either of them unless I'd actually done my homework, read the literature, asked questions, and made up my own mind.
We skeptics believe that if you even inquire into weird stuff, you must believe it's absolutely true from the get-go. You're gullible. But speaking of powered flight, did you know that it took 3 years for the Scientific American to acknowledge the Wright brothers' first flight? That's an example of prudent scientific journalism.
Speaking of history, did you know that science and democracy both appeared at about the same time? Did you know that they both sprang from the same impulses of independent thought, the freedom to do one's own experiments, and the rejection of imposed beliefs and institutional authority?
You non-skeptics have no respect for institutional authority.
Many scientists today do actually find themselves having to obey institutional authority in order to keep their job, funding and reputation, and avoid ridicule and dismissal. But, in their heart of hearts, they wish they could get their freedom back and once again apply their talents to expanding human knowledge and meeting real human needs.
I think you non-skeptics are simply superstitious.
Superstitions are like rumors that just go around mindlessly from one person to another. It's like a contagion. Many self-described skeptics base their beliefs on such rumors without engaging any of their own critical thinking.
I'll bet you believe in crop circles, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus.
We scientists don't confuse reality with fairy tales. Crop circles actually exist, but I have no opinion about them because I haven't researched them. However, I can tell you that aliens exist because I've seen them with my own eyes.
You're crazy. I'm outta here.
Yourself, then you are actually a pseudo-skeptic. The term is explained quite well in Wikipedia, quoted here with some commentary. Pseudoskepticism. The term pseudoskepticism was popularized and characterized by Marcello Truzzi in response to skeptics who, in his opinion, made negative claims without biography publishers. Truzzi's journal became the official journal of Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, CSICOP. About a year after the founding of CSICOP, he left the organization after receiving a vote of no confidence from the group's executive council. COP, by founding father skeptics, to describe a lot of dishonest skeptics, most of them in fact, who came on board wanting to hijack the organization for political purposes. It's a good story, so if you spend your time online, crusading against the paranormal, the afterlife, and head-kicking Christians, to make them more like most people online who call themselves skeptics, are taken by surprise when they are corrected and told they are really pseudo-skeptics. And it's an old word, 25 years old. The word was coined inside the peak skeptic organization, CSI, bearing the burden of proof of those claims. 12, that is, evidence-free diatribes, denunciations, invective, polemic. Truzzi founded the skeptical journal Explorations, and was invited to be a founding member of the skeptic organization CSICOP, as its co-chairman with Paul Kurtz, who also founded Prometheus Books,